will speak in English, and I will try to speak slowly and clearly so that those of you who are not so familiar with English language can hopefully understand most of what I say. In fact, I wouldn't really worry too much if you don't understand, because my sense is that when we have these kind of gatherings, most of the communication is what we pick up in the heart, in spite of the words. So I've no idea of what Vesna and Carmen said, so forgive me if I repeat what they said, but I'm very, very pleased to be here and very delighted to see so many of you that you've come to hear this talk. We were talking, Vesna and me, and I was telling her how in my hermitage in Scotland, which is very, very small, and in a very rural, remote area, quite frequently I end up giving a talk to just one person. So we were prepared for one person or 20, 30 people, but it's nice to see many of you here. Obviously I don't know you, and I don't know how much you've practiced, how much you know about Buddhism, but my sense is that for this evening what will be good is if we spend a short time in meditation. I'll give some guidance. It'll be just very short, 5-10 minutes, just to help us all to really gather, to all arrive here. As we all know, we can be here physically, but our minds can be still where we were working, or if we've had a difficult interaction with somebody, we can still be kind of trying to sort out what we should have said, or what they should have said, and so on. So I will give a short meditation, and then I'll offer a little bit of teaching and a talk. We'll see what arises. In our tradition, we don't prepare talks. Our preparation is just our mindfulness practice, and we see what arises. And what arises depends very much on all of you. So we'll see what happens there. And then we'll have an opportunity if any of you have questions. So we'll do a short meditation. Most of you are sitting in a very nice upright position. I suggest we take a few minutes just to establish a nice upright posture. The reason for this is because meditation is very much about being awake and also being relaxed. But if we're too relaxed, then we can very easily stop being awake, and that's not so good. It's one of my specialities, it's stopping being awake. So I'm quite keen on emphasizing to sit in a position that is reasonably comfortable, where you can sit up nice and straight. And when you feel a little bit settled, then we can close the eyes or lower the gaze so you're not too distracted by the things around about you, not too concerned about what other people are doing, but more just taking time to be with yourself, to attend to how you are right now. So it can be helpful just to begin with the sense of the physical position, the body. Noticing the pressure of the body on the mat, the floor, the cushion. Aware of the space around the body. The body sitting upright in space. Noticing any area of tension and just seeing if you can consciously relax, particularly around the face and the shoulders. So see if you can notice the face. How does it feel from the inside? You may feel a kind of tightness around the forehead and the eyes, the scalp. And just see if you can notice that begin to soften as you breathe away the feeling of tightness. face go quite loose, quite soft. No longer concerned with how we appear to others. Time for just attending to how we ourselves are this time in this place. Letting the shoulders drop. When we're doing difficult work or driving, the shoulders can become quite hunched up, quite tight, so we let them loosen and soften and drop. So we take time to set the body at ease. Notice the breathing of the body. The in-breath, the out-breath. Just enjoying that sense of the body breathing here, now. Breathing in, breathing out. Finding our own rhythm. And noticing the tendency of the mind to engage with thought, memories of the past, what happened today, difficult moments, things that you did well. Just noticing that tendency of the mind to remember the impressions of the day. And if it's not doing that, perhaps it's leaning into the future, what we're going to do next. And this is normal, this is what the mind does. So we simply notice, bringing the awareness back to the breath, here, now. So we sit quietly together and just enjoy this moment as it is. If the mind is very busy, very agitated, that's quite okay. Simply come back to the breath. Enjoy the in-breath. Enjoy the out-breath. Allowing the mind to settle. Be aware of sounds, the sounds of the street. Gentle little sounds within the room, the sound of our neighbour breathing, coughing. This can all be part of our meditation. It's not something we have to fight with, struggle with. We simply notice it and continue to enjoy the experience of breathing, the experience of being here, now. Just one breath, and then the next breath. Allowing the mind to be very simple. A moment or two, I'll ring the bell, and you can just stay quiet, listen to the sound of the bell, hear it dying away. Thank you. So I've been living as in monasteries as a nun and a novice to start with for more than 35 years, which is kind of a surprise when I think of it. It was a surprise when I first became a nun, and the fact that I'm still living as a nun is still a little bit strange to me. But in some ways I was very fortunate because I had been practicing for a number of years before I came across this tradition of Buddhism. So when I came across this and recognized the extent to which it could help me in my life, I just had a tremendous sense of gratitude. And I still have that sense of gratitude. I was very fortunate in meeting Ajahn Chah, an American monk, just shortly after he had arrived in the UK, in London. I was actually living just round the corner from where he was, with 3 other monks, right in the middle of the city. As some of you may know, he comes from what's called the forest tradition. He had been living in Thailand for 10 years with Ajahn Chah, a very well-known Thai monk, a forest master. And coming from the forest after 10 years in the forest to the middle of London was not easy. They were living in a very sort of tall, narrow house on a very busy street opposite a pub. And every evening there would be music, especially in the summertime when the windows were open. So we'd be sitting there in meditation and there'd be this music coming from the pub across the street. So it was hard. And I remember Ajahn Sumedho, sometimes when he was giving teaching, he would talk about how helpful it was to use nature as an anchor for the mind. And here he was in the middle of London with very few trees, and he would say things like, so when I need to be with nature, I look up at the sky. And for him that was the contact that he was able to have with nature when they first arrived in the city. So it was very hard for them to start with. After a couple of years they moved out to the countryside. A property became available, they were offered the use of a forest, and the trust that was there to support them purchased a crumbling Victorian mansion. The house was in very poor shape, and it was at that time that I went to help them to move in. And the house was such that if you stood in the basement, you could actually see the sky. And that was a house with 3 or 4 floors. So there were holes in the floors, there were mushrooms growing out of the walls. I think one water tap that worked. We used candles to start with. So I lived there when I first joined the community in 1979. So what was it that was so special about Ajahn Sumedho and the Theravada tradition? This is a question that sometimes I ask myself. And I think for me it was the fact that he came from a Western background. He was American. He had exactly the same hang-ups that all of us have, the same kind of neuroses. And he had been able to use the Theravada teachings as he had learnt from Ajahn Chah and to apply them to his particular situation. Quite a number of Westerners had come to Ajahn Chah in those early days, and they too had been able to benefit. Ajahn Chah was known for his particular teaching methods. He used what he would call his metta magnet. Some of you may know the word metta means loving kindness. So he had a tremendous warmth. I had the good fortune to meet him when he came to London for his second visit, and it was quite extraordinary to be in his presence, just this sort of sense of being plugged into something very strong, very, very attractive. You just wanted to be around him as much as possible. However, having attracted people, he would then begin to teach them, and that wasn't always so comfortable. What he wanted to get across to people was what we would call the 3 characteristics of conditioned phenomena. This very, very simple teaching of the Buddha, teaching of impermanence, that things are always changing. There's no real stability in anything that we come across in the world. Because they're always changing, they're unsatisfactory. So anicca means changing, not steady, not permanent. Dukkha means unsatisfactory. And anatta, not self. So it's these 3 characteristics that he would emphasize over and over again in his teachings. It's interesting that recently a collection of his teachings has been gathered and published, and I have a copy up at my hermitage in Scotland, and every moon day on our kind of Sabbath I would read a chapter of his teachings, and I was quite interested just to see the extent to which he just emphasizes the same thing over and over again. Anicca, dukkha, anatta. Impermanent, not satisfactory, not self. So this is what he wanted to get across to people. And he found many different ways of doing this. So each of the monks who I know who lived with Ajahn Chah, they each had their own personal stories about ways that he would teach them. Sometimes people would call him, they say he would torture them. He would put them through really difficult experiences just so they could see the ways that their minds would struggle, in order that they have the opportunity to let go of that struggle. In Buddhism we talk about, there's a lot of lists, so I'll probably be sharing a lot of lists this evening. So we've had the first list of the 3 characteristics. The second list is another 3, the 3 refuges. And those of you who have come across Buddha's teachings before will be very familiar with these. Refuge in Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. And I always kind of bring it down to 1 actually, just the present moment, being here, now. When we're fully present, there is no suffering. There may be physical pain, there may be mental pain, but if we can be fully present with it, there's the letting go of the struggle for things to be other than the way that they are. And when we begin to look into our suffering, we begin to see that the struggle is not so much the pain, not so much the feeling of agitation or anger or irritation or grumpiness or whatever it is, but the struggle is because we want things to be other than the way that they are. So Ajahn Chah was constantly encouraging people to let go of that struggle. There's a very amusing documentary that was made during the very first week that we were at Chithurst. Ajahn Chah was visiting at the time, and it's very dated. It was made in 1979. It's hard to believe that the characters in the movie were not actors, sort of caricatures of real people. But actually, no, they were all real people. I was there, I know. Anyway, so it was a movie about the arrival of the monks at Chores and the response of the local people. Many of them were not very happy. They had some concerns. Anyway, and Ajahn Chah talks about what they're intending to do there, and there are interviews with different people, and Ajahn Chah appears, and at the end, the final question to Ajahn Chah is, what's the most important thing for a monk to do in training? And his response is to let go. So his teaching is a teaching of letting go. So when we really establish ourselves in the present moment, that's a letting go. I was chatting with Vesna on the way here. We were talking about a difficult situation that she'd experienced recently. For all of us, we have difficult situations. It's interesting to see how if you're, say, having a discussion with somebody, an argument, they say one thing and then you say something else, and then they say something else, and you can feel the whole thing kind of escalating. We have it in community a lot. And by the end of it, you actually can't remember what it was you were arguing about. But there's this very strong feeling of wanting to be right, wanting to have won the argument. And I've noticed how wonderful it is that if you're in a conversation like this with somebody, you can feel yourself getting wound up, how just taking one moment to breathe out and relax is a moment of letting go. And suddenly you don't mind anymore. It's fine for them to win the argument. It's fine for them to have the last word. So what's the letting go? What are we letting go of? We're letting go of that ego, that sense of self that wants to be right, that wants to win. And just resting in the present moment, realizing we don't have to hold on to that sense of self. So this is what Ajahn Chah was constantly pointing to, this sense of self, the ego that struggles. So there are stories about how he would, like on the moon days, the full moon, the half moon, the new moon days, that's 4 times a month in Thailand, and we don't do it here quite in Britain quite so much, but there was a custom for the monks to sit up and meditate through the night. In our communities in the UK, like at Chores when I was living there for a number of years, we would sit up on the full moon, the new moon day, we would sit up until 4 o'clock in the morning in meditation. On the half moon days until midnight. But in Thailand they would do it every week, and then the monks would go on alms round the next morning. So they wouldn't sleep at all. And what would happen is that people would bring in a hot drink, maybe some coffee, and they'd put the kettle down, and there'd be this wonderful fragrance of coffee. And the monks would sort of smell this coffee and think, when's he going to pour out the coffee? And he'd start talking to somebody and he'd have a conversation. And for the Westerners, of course, they couldn't understand a word he was saying. They would be really uncomfortable. They didn't have these sort of nice mats that we have here with zafus. They'd be on a kind of concrete floor, really uncomfortable. And they would sit, and they wouldn't understand. And he'd be telling jokes and laughing and having a wonderful time. And the coffee would be there, and it'd be getting colder and colder. And they'd be there feeling, first of all, just sort of thinking about the coffee, and then they begin to get a bit angry, and then they get furious and uncomfortable and think, when is he going to offer the coffee? And eventually they would give up and they say, okay, and let go. And then eventually Ajahn Chah would stop talking and he'd say, there's some coffee. Anybody like some coffee? So they would have a chance to actually see the way that the mind would concoct a sense of rage around something, around an idea about what should be happening. And this is something that we all do. And he was a master at letting people see that, letting people witness that. Because we can read about these things, we can study these things, and be able to give wonderful talks about these things, very detailed, brilliant explanations. They say that it's like, having a cookbook and being able to read all the recipes, but never actually tasting the food. And so Ajahn Chah, his way of teaching was to help people to actually, taste the food, get in there, get out your spoon and actually taste it. Because the Dhamma is something that each one of us can taste. We can experience it directly, here, now, but only when we're present, because the Dhamma is the truth. It's something that is here and now, it's everywhere, it's not something in the mind. The Buddha's teaching is always pointing to that truth, encouraging us to look at the obvious facts of our existence. So anicca, these bodies, we tend to not really want to think too much about death. A very awkward topic, and it's not something you would kind of talk about at a dinner party. I mean, people wouldn't like that. You wouldn't be invited back again if you started talking about death. But this is what the Buddha was always encouraging us to look at. Not to make us feel wretched and miserable and depressed, but to really reflect on our existence, so that we take these things on board, so that as we get older, and our faces begin to get a bit lined, our hair goes grey or falls out altogether, and we stop seeing so well, we stop hearing so well, we stop being able to move around so well, we're no longer quite so beautiful. It's not something that we need to feel desperate about, but more just a sense of, oh yes, that's what we were told about. This is what the Buddha means. Old age, sickness, death. Okay, we can struggle with it if we want to, we can resist it if we want to, but we can also make peace with it. We can live happily and peacefully with a body that's getting a bit decrepit. We can look after it, we take care of it, but of course it's going to get old. It's going to wear out, and that's okay. The Buddha emphasized this for many reasons, but one reason is it's an encouragement to us to really value the opportunity that we have as human beings. It's a very, very precious thing to be born as a human being. So sometimes you might ask, why? What's so precious about being born as a human being? Well, we have an opportunity to do a lot of good things. We have an opportunity to learn, to study what it means to be a human being. For those of us here who have an opportunity to come across the Buddha's teachings, we have the opportunity to use these teachings to liberate the heart from suffering. So for me, when I first came across them, I used to suffer a lot. I mean, I still do suffer sometimes, but I used to really suffer terribly because of the way that my mind was. I wanted to be good, I wanted to be kind, I wanted to be easygoing. I didn't want to be anxious, I didn't want to be fearful, and I could see how anxiety was undermining my energy, my well-being. And the most difficult thing for me was jealousy. I used to really hate the fact that I would get jealous. If I saw somebody who I felt was better than me, then this terrible thing would happen. Far from being able to say, oh, I'm so pleased for you that you've got this wonderful thing that I want. This, something really ugly would happen in my mind. It was kind of like an affliction. Every time there'd be a situation, I could feel it coming. Strangely enough, I was jealous of my boyfriend, who was, a really, really wonderful person. And he was very, very good at explaining things to people. And people would kind of gather around and listen. And I'd be sort of there thinking, I want to be able to do that. Why can't I do that? It was very painful. And I used to pray about it. I used to meditate as best I could. And nothing seemed to be able to make it go away. Eventually, when I was on retreat, my first retreat with Ajahn Chah, he said some very helpful things. He pointed to the fact that whatever we experience, whatever we think, whatever mood we're experiencing, or whatever idea we have about ourselves, is changing. If you remember at the beginning I spoke about anicca, change. What I was doing with this jealousy when it arose was making it into something very fixed and solid in my mind. A serious problem that I had to do something about, something I had to fix. I didn't really trust that if I could let go of that desire for things to be otherwise, it would change on its own. It would go. It would be transformed. It couldn't not. The other thing that was pointed out was, it's not you, it's not yours. You don't have to claim it as part of your identity. Certainly it's unpleasant. None of us likes to be jealous. None of us likes to be irritable or grumpy. There are all kinds of things that we don't like. We don't like feeling doubtful. We don't like feeling unconfident. We don't like feeling that we've made a mistake. These are all we don't like being blamed. These are all very unpleasant conditions that as human beings we experience, that we're subject to. But when we really use the teachings of the Buddha to contemplate, to examine, we see that actually, that's not me. This is just like an unpleasant visitor who has arrived. And as such, we don't have to fight it, we don't have to drive it out, we just have to allow it to be there until it's time for it to change. And this was a very, very helpful insight for me. So I found that with jealousy, I could actually take an interest in it. Okay, here's jealousy. I don't like you, but that's all right. You can be here for as long as you need to stay, and then you can go. That's fine. I no longer created this huge monster out of it. It became something rather small. Unpleasant. I needed to attend to it, because obviously when we're in a bad mood, when we're jealous, when we're upset, we can do or say things that are rather unfortunate. So there needed to be the awareness of it, the respect for it, the care, the restraint, and to take an interest and this quality of presence that enables it to be there and enables it to change and cease. Some of you may have come across one of the Theravada teachings, was the first sermon of the Buddha, the Dhammacakka Sutta. And this is something we recite very often in our monasteries. It's one of my favourite teachings, where the Buddha talks about what we call the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path. It's quite long, maybe 15 minutes it would take to recite, 15-20 minutes. And at the very end, and it's a teaching he gave to his first 5 companions. And at the end, he realizes that one of them has understood, one of them has got what he was trying to explain. And it says the Venerable Candasiri has understood, he's got it. And then it describes what the Venerable Candasiri has understood. And, as I said, it's quite long, 20 minutes or so. And you think, well, what's this great insight? And it must be something very, very special. And it's just one sentence. Whatever has the nature to arise has the nature to cease. So I was very interested when I first realized and understood what this teaching was. And I thought, well, this is something that is worthy of contemplation. Just to consider in my own life, everything that has the nature to arise has the nature to cease. Everything that has been born dies. This body has been born, this body will die. This mood has arisen, this mood will cease. This relationship has come about, this relationship will change, it will cease. The suffering is if we hold on to things. Either holding on to the things that we like, that we want to keep, or holding on to the things that we want to get rid of, that we want to change, the jealousy, the irritability that we don't like, so we want to get rid of it, get it out. When we can just hold it gently in consciousness, we can allow it to go, allow it to change. This requires mindfulness, it requires presence, it requires patience. The number one austerity is just to be able to be patient, to bear with the difficult things of our lives, and to bear with the fact that things change. The wonderful things change, the horrible things change, and we can be at peace with all of it when we're present. Sounds very easy, doesn't it? Sounds very easy. And this is why we talk about practice. We talk about Buddhist practice. Sometimes we come to practice and we think, well, I should be enlightened now. I shouldn't be struggling. I shouldn't be suffering. I should have got it. I should have understood it. we've set our feet on the path, the Eightfold Path, the way to liberation. Like the Buddha presented this teaching for our welfare, for our happiness. We can put our feet on the path and we can walk the path. And it's a gradual training. Little by little, we find that we notice that we're suffering less. The things that used to upset us, that we used to struggle with, aren't such a problem anymore. Gradually, we find the way to suffer less. So the encouragement is to cultivate a daily practice of meditation. Maybe just a few minutes to start with, and then more as we get to like it. It's an acquired taste, so we start off with a little, and then gradually we find we want to do more. And using this time to observe the way the mind is, to observe the body, to contemplate our existence, rather than continuously reacting to the things that we experience, grabbing onto the things that we like, trying to get rid of the things that we don't like, just simply lurching from one thing to the next, trying to find a place of comfort and ease. Instead, learning how to just let go, how to be present, how to observe, how to notice that struggle, and to keep letting go, moment by moment. So I'm aware that it's the end of the week and that some of you may be tired, and I could carry on talking a lot, but I think it might be interesting to offer you the opportunity to ask me questions about anything that you're interested in, either about Buddhism, about me, I'll choose whether to answer those or not, or about Buddhist practice. So I think that's what I would like to do now. This is not the end. There's lots more that I can say, but I'd like to know from you what you would like to hear from me, if that seems like a good idea. Or you might want to just sit quietly for a few moments while you see what kind of questions arise for you. Yes?
I would like to hear when you let go something. Maybe we have fear that we will hurt this other person or ourselves by letting go. So how do we kind of create harmony together while letting go? Because this kind of, probably we don't let go because we don't want to create this harmony.
It's important to realize that letting go is not a rejection of anyone or anything. So sometimes we can think that we're letting go, but actually we're just rejecting, we're pushing something out. So an important element in practice is metta. And the way that I interpret this is non-aversion. In a situation maybe that's very difficult, that we would like to let go of, in other words, to sort of get rid of, to change it quickly in some way. There can be a kind of reaction that looks like letting go. What we need to do is to actually acknowledge the situation as it is, to make peace with the situation as it is. It's almost like a kind of an intuitive response. It's almost like an animal response, actually. My sense is that when we let go in this way, the other person will not feel rejected, because it comes from a place of presence and a place of non-aversion. I don't know if I've explained that very well, but it's very different from a rejection. If I reject somebody, like if say, there's any kind of aversion or negativity in my response to somebody, they pick up on it, they are hurt. Whereas if I can genuinely accommodate them and their difficulties and the unpleasantness, whatever it might be, then the letting go has a very different quality to it. It was very interesting, actually, years ago in community, and this was talking about 30 years ago, in fact, there was somebody who a lot of people had difficulty with this person, and I used to get quite upset by the way that they behaved. And I remember saying one time to Ajahn Sumedho, I find this really difficult, and I would become quite tense. And it was incredibly helpful when he said to me, yes, that person has got a very difficult energy, haven't they? And what he had done was he'd actually accepted the person as they were, the unpleasantness, the difficulty. He wasn't making a problem about it, and he was still acknowledging that they were difficult. So he wasn't asking that this person be other than the way that they were, but accepting them as they were and creating a sense of spaciousness, a sense of ease around them. And I've noticed that when I can do this with people, it's like giving them the space to see for themselves the effect that they're having on others. Sometimes in community, I used to find that there'd be particular people who wouldn't react to me in the way that I was expecting, maybe wouldn't respond at all. When they did that, it was almost like they were a mirror. So I didn't feel rejected by them, but I felt actually enabled to have a sense of what I was bringing into the situation. And as I said, it could be quite uncomfortable, but there was a sense of peacefulness and actually a sense of gratitude. So when we're really mindful, when we're really present with each other, with a heart of kindness, people might not feel particularly comfortable, but they're not going to feel rejected. And the sense of rejection is something that, they maybe create that, but if our intention is not to reject them, then there can be a sense of peacefulness there at the same time.
As I understood, letting go would rather come from a place of the heart than a place of me, or sense of I.
That's exactly right. As I said, it sounds like it's a very simple teaching, but it's actually quite an exacting teaching. Again, practice. So, we'll probably make lots of mistakes. We'll probably make a fool of ourselves plenty of times, and we'll probably hurt people plenty of times. But our intention is to turn aside from deliberately harming others. And okay, we'll make mistakes, and we have to then learn how to forgive ourselves. I notice myself, if I know I've hurt somebody, then I can turn it around and hurt myself. Oh, you terrible person, you've hurt that person. Candasiri, you shouldn't have said that. You've really messed up there, and that person is really upset. And so you turn it to yourself. So then you have to bring out this heart of kindness towards even this being here. So I have to learn how to say, Candasiri, okay, it was a mistake. So what can we learn from this? How can we avoid doing the same thing again? You did your best. So finding ways to encourage ourselves rather than turning that harsh, critical judgment towards this being here. So it takes time, but it's a fascinating journey. It's a fascinating practice, I find, if I can avoid being too hard on myself. Sometimes we can get rather discouraged. One of the things that the Buddha really emphasizes is the importance of having good friends, kalyanamitta. And this is one of the great advantages to living in a monastic community, because you're surrounded by people who are, doing a similar practice, and, we need encouragement. We need support, encouragement, and I'm very interested in people finding ways to support themselves in their practice, because it's not always easy. And sometimes we need somebody to say, that's all right. Don't worry about that, it's okay. Because I think I think it's probably a Western disease, although I'm learning from our Thai friends and Sri Lankan friends that actually they're catching the same disease as well. But certainly Western people seem to be brilliant at beating themselves up if they're not completely perfect straight away right now. Is there anything else anybody would like to ask?
This may be the similar thing, but can you a little bit comment on the difference between being passive and letting go? Because I know actually one person, when she tries to meditate, then she expressed this fear that she will become more passive.
Yes.
Which is not true, but I would like to hear your comment on that.
This is a very, very important question, because I think there is a danger to think of Buddhism as being very, very passive. And we talk a lot about letting go and making peace with things, and it all sounds very sweet and lovely. And accepting things and so on. What I'm saying is that when we act, it's important that we act from a place of mindfulness, from a place of presence. And in order to come to a place of presence, that requires a letting go of the struggle, a letting go of the aversion. So it doesn't mean that we say that everything is wonderful and we don't have to do anything about the evils of the society or the things that people are doing to each other that are awful, or this person who keeps on mistreating me or so on, taking advantage of me. When that happens, you notice at first that there's an inner reaction, how dare they? There's a sense of, or there can be a sense of anger or upset. When we're not practicing, we can react. Okay, so this person has taken advantage of me, I'm going to hurt them back. You can really want to do that. In fact, in our community there was somebody who'd done something and been part of something that I found very upsetting, and I wanted to hurt them. I definitely wanted to hurt them. And then I thought, Candasiri, that is not what the Buddha taught. And over the years I've discovered that if I do respond in that way, I end up getting hurt. The situation does not improve. It doesn't bring a very good result. So over the years I've just learnt how to trust mindfulness more than my reactive mind. Rather than simply reacting when we see something wrong, learning how to come to a place of acceptance, a place of presence. It's not saying that that thing is all right, but we acknowledge, okay, this is what's happening right now, this is what this person is doing. I can let go of that reactivity. And this is so important. I so want to explain it in the right way, and I'm trying to find the right words. So what we find is that when we can actually just be present, when we can actually, you find there's a kind of, a sort of sense of, it's almost as though somebody has switched off the current. There's no longer a kind of energy there. And another energy comes from a different place. We can respond in a way that brings a much better result. So it's not coming from ego, it's coming from a place of wisdom, a place of compassion. In those kind of situations, sometimes we surprise ourselves. We find ourselves doing or saying something that we've actually maybe never even thought of or never done before. Or sometimes the things around us create a situation where the issue is resolved in a way, a much better way than we can have thought of. So it can sometimes require a tremendous amount of letting go, a tremendous amount of patience to wait for that moment. But once we've, reacted a few times, hurt a few people a few times, made a fool of ourselves a few times, there is more interest in actually cultivating this letting go practice and finding another way of responding. So I really celebrate that possibility. But it does take patience, and it takes a kind of faith as well. And that faith grows as we put it into practice, as we test it out. So it's not at all passive, but it's about acting from the right place. It's interesting looking at the life of the Buddha himself, because you hear about this remarkable person, who was so wise, so compassionate, and you think, well, he must have done a lot of meditation, and I'm sure he did do a lot of meditation. His, if you look at his routine, it was many, many hours of meditation, but he was also engaged. So he would meet with all kinds of people and respond to all kinds of situations that he came across. And it was always, the very skillful response. And sometimes, he had quite a sense of humour. Sometimes he would, he would be able to point things out to people in a very, very clever, brilliant way. Finding just the right response for the particular different situations that he came across. So I'm not saying that we're exactly like the Buddha, but it's something we can aspire to. So little by little. But it's certainly not about not doing anything. So I really, one of the things that I find most exciting is when people come on retreats and people particularly who have occupations that require them to engage with issues in the world, and the idea of them actually coming and cultivating meditation, cultivating understanding, developing wisdom, compassion, is just really exciting to me, because it the sense that they can actually bring these qualities into the particular sphere that they're engaging with, that they can inform their contribution, their gift, their offering to the world, their skill, with compassion, rather than just brilliance that comes from the mind, that might be able to do things that are very spectacular, that might be actually quite harmful often. So it's an exciting opportunity to me, the possibility of responding rather than simply reacting to the conditions that we come across. So it's very creative, in fact, as well.
It's also interesting that you still keep your whole range of emotions and everything, because people can think that when you're meditating, when you're being quiet and things like that, you just don't feel anything. But
that's right.
That's not true.
You still
feel, but you just don't. As you said, you learn how to react differently from that emotion.
How to respond rather than react.
Yeah.
Important difference.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. In fact, I think as we meditate, we feel things more intensely. You become more aware of the emotions that course through this being, and it's a whole transformation that happens. So it's not at all a repression. If you try to do it with repression, it'll be a disaster. Sometimes you meet people who sort of seem to be very, very calm, very in control, and the more calm, the more in control they are, the more I'm kind of caught in it. People used to think I was very calm and in control. And one time, this was before I came across Buddhist teaching, Buddhist practice. I made a practice of trying to be very calm, very in control. And one evening, something happened. My boyfriend said something that upset me, and I threw my supper at him. I was so shocked. I'd never imagined doing anything like that, but I just picked up this plate with all this food on it and just threw it at him. I think he was a bit surprised as well. But that was because I was repressing. I got very good at repressing. I was actually frightened of the anger because it seemed so powerful. I didn't know how to deal with it. I couldn't actually let it into consciousness. And it's interesting, since being a nun, I've actually experienced more rage than I ever would have imagined I had, because I'd got very good at pushing it down and saying the right thing and sort of smiling sweetly and saying, responding in these ways. But practice is not about repression, but it's about actually learning how to restrain, how to direct the energy of anger. There's a great verse in the Dhammapada. This is a collection of very, very short sayings of the Buddha. And it's a verse that I was always very puzzled about, because those of you who are familiar with the Dhammapada will know that there are masses of translations. There are about kind of 50 or 60 different translations, or certainly into English, and they're all slightly different. And it was only when I actually looked into the Pali words that were used in this verse and actually checked out what they actually meant that I was able to understand it. And it's a teaching about anger. And it says that one who can control or direct or manage, one who can manage their anger once it has arisen is like a real charioteer. You know what a chariot is? Charioteer. Others simply grip onto the reins. So just to be able to recognize the anger and just to sort of manage it, to contain it, to direct it appropriately, is a real skill, rather than just frantically holding onto the reins or just letting the horses run away. So I find that quite a powerful image. Because of course we're going to get angry. There's plenty of things to get angry about. Anybody who lives with anybody else is going to get angry sometimes. It's normal, and it's not that you're not a good Buddhist just because you feel angry. But you're not a good Buddhist if you make a habit of lashing out at people in anger. That's where you're less skillful as a Buddhist. A Buddhist is, the Buddha encourages us to be aware, to acknowledge, everything that arises in consciousness, because it's an opportunity for learning more about the human predicament, cultivating more understanding of our own suffering, the way we make ourselves suffer, and also understanding about the way that other people cause suffering for themselves, their own fears and desires and foolishness. That way we become much less harsh in our judgments of others. Sorry, there's more questions. Yes, okay.
I have two questions. One is, what happened to your boyfriend?
What
is he doing today? And another one is, since you were a nun for 35 years, could you tell us how did it change for women? Since Western said that you were one of the first women in the West, or told to go to ordained in that. So how in 25 years?
What progress has been made?
Yes, if any.
My boyfriend married somebody else and lived happily for a number of years, and then he's now a professor, a very, very brilliant scholar actually, published quite a lot, and had a family, still a very fine person as far as I can tell. That was my boyfriend. And what happened to the nuns? Well, progress. Progress is happening. It's not very spectacular in terms of numbers. In terms of understanding and opportunities for nuns, there is more understanding, there are opportunities for women to practice as nuns. It's been difficult, I would say. Within the Theravada tradition and the Thai forest tradition and Ajahn Chah tradition, I seem to have landed up in the most conservative of all possible situations for women. It's required a lot of letting go, because quite naturally one can come to this with a very political eye and see, well, there are this number of men, so there should be this number of women. The men have this, so the women should have this. And we can end up putting a lot of pressure for things to change in a particular way. What has happened over the years is that change has happened very gradually. And a few years ago, there was a situation where there was perhaps a little bit too much pressure put into the situation, and the result was that there was a kind of an ultimatum, and quite a number of the nuns left the community. So from having been almost 20 nuns at one point, we're now less than half of that. But the other nuns are still, well, quite a number of them are still practicing in other situations, and the Theravada, the situation for Theravada nuns is changing, and it's kind of diversifying. So I've chosen to stick within my particular community and tradition because I have a very strong sense of loyalty and gratitude, and I also have an appreciation for the goodness and the beauty of that particular form. And I also have a lot of faith and a lot of patience. And an interest in using it for practice, and also an interest in development happening in a good way. I'm not impressed by large numbers of people choosing to be nuns. If people would like to come, I'm very happy to encourage them and to guide them in the best way I can. But I also, I can see that it's very much an organic process. So I see it like a plant, and our nuns' community plant, had rather a severe pruning. But when things are pruned, they can actually get stronger. So sometimes I look and I think, oh dear, what's happening here? And I think, well, what can I do? And I think, well, I can practice. I can really put effort into my own practice, cultivate wisdom, cultivate discernment, create an atmosphere of trust and friendliness as far as possible within our community, so that people don't feel kind of challenged or pressurized by the situation, but that we're all of us able to hold the situation with patience and to allow an evolution in accordance with Dhamma. So one can get very fixed in one's views and think, well, all of, create, the monks as being this kind of uniform group of men who want to keep their power or whatever. You create these ideas about it. But then when you talk to individuals, you see it's not like that at all. That actually, basically, the majority are good people and everybody would like to see a flourishing nuns community, and it takes time. So I didn't come into a community that was already established. I didn't have wise women to guide me and to teach me how to guide others. I've had to learn by making lots and lots of mistakes, and hopefully fewer mistakes are being made now. It feels like a kind of an evolution that is not going to happen just suddenly, but over time. And it's only going to happen in accordance with the practice of all of us, really. So it's complex, and it's gradual. I hope that sort of answers your question.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, now I have more of them, but I'll just start with the one that I wanted to ask before. I was wondering if you could talk about a little bit about patterns, because
Patterns.
yes, ever since I started practicing meditation, you start feeling more subtle ways of functioning of your mind, and some of these patterns help you and they're good for you, and some of them aren't. And you also maybe start to be a little bit more sensitive to other people's patterns. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. Obviously, if you continue your practice, then your patterns simply go away, at least the ones that seemed to be minimizing your efforts, or how would I say it?
Well, it'd be nice if they did just go away.
And I'm wondering if after 35 years of meditation, do you still notice patterns in your mind?
Indeed, yes. It's a lifetime's work. One of the factors of enlightenment is called Dhamma, which means investigation. So one of the things I always encourage people is to be curious. Rather than if you sort of notice a pattern, a sort of some kind of foolishness that you do repeatedly, rather than something, oh, this is terrible, I'm awful, I shouldn't have this, I must get rid of it quickly. It's actually, okay, well let's have a look at this. Let's see if we can understand this. Let's see if we can figure out a way of dismantling it. And it's a little bit like some of those games. I don't know, we had a game as children called pick-up sticks. And you let go, there'd be these kind of small sticks, and you'd drop them, and they'd all kind of land on top of each other. And you'd have to get them out without moving. And if you moved them, then somebody else had a turn. So with these patterns, it's like you've got a pile of sticks. So you think, well, okay, so how can I get it out? How can I transform this situation? This aspect of taking an interest, fun, curiosity, fun, interest, rather than aversion or negativity or judgment. So be interested in your patterns. My sense is the more you work with your own patterns, you then may be in a situation where, maybe without even saying anything, other people can be helped to see their patterns. You can't really do very much about other people's patterns other than by dealing with your own patterns. I mean, occasionally now, because people come and talk to me about their practice, sometimes I can make suggestions about how somebody can work with a pattern. But I can only do it when I've done something similar myself. I can make suggestions, and they have to take an interest. I can also create a sense of ease and a sense of fun and enjoyment around their patterns, because sometimes people feel pretty miserable about their patterns. Whereas if I can say, well, actually, that's just a habit. Don't worry about it. It's not a big thing. See if you can figure out a way of working with it. But it's good just to focus on one's own patterns, to work with them, and then gradually there'll be good effects around about. But this quality of kindness is so important as opposed to judgment. Kindness, acceptance. Not the kind of acceptance that just lets everything, doesn't bother, but it's a kind of an engaged kindness that wants the best for this being here. I want the best for this being here. And that's not selfish. Or you could call it an enlightened selfishness. It's just because, if I benefit, then everybody benefits. So it's not at the expense of others, but as a support for others. So we begin to see ourselves as just part of humanity. And if we can at least relieve the suffering here, then that's doing our bit for relieving the suffering of humanity. Is another way of looking at it.
And creating a better environment for everyone.
Indeed.
Contributing.
Indeed. But we need to be very honest. We need to really face up to what's going on for us. And, that can sometimes be a little bit difficult. But fortunately, we don't have to tell anybody else about it. It can be a private humiliation. Yes.
I would like to ask you, maybe if you can share with us your experience of maybe difference or sameness of being together and being alone. Because I guess you have spent quite some time being together with others in the community and also being alone and creating space for these experiences. And my second question is whether over all these years have you noticed some changes in your sense of humor?
I think for all of us, practice with other people is helpful, and practice alone is helpful. They each have different benefits. Sometimes people come on retreat and they just want to spend the whole time on retreat. They don't want to leave the retreat because, they've been on retreat and there's been other people there, but they've had a chance to not talk and to be much more inward in their focus. When we're quiet, either with other people or on our own, we have a chance to observe more closely the way that we relate to ourselves. And that's very helpful. It's very important. But what I say to people is that it's when you actually begin to be with other people that you strengthen your practice, you strengthen your mindfulness. Because other people are constantly disturbing us. They're constantly pushing our buttons, treading on our toes, upsetting us. And it's then that you have a chance to really notice your reactivity. We can be very, very serene when we're not talking to people. Like in our monastic community, people get along really well, mostly, during the winter retreat. Nobody talks, and everything seems absolutely fine. And you have people who think that they're practically enlightened because they haven't been upset by anything. But then, as soon as we start talking again, then things can erupt. And Ajahn Sumedha has a very funny story. He spent a year living in a kuti, in a hut in Thailand, very, very quiet, doing a lot of concentration practice, very, very strong samadhi, and so he was very serene, very high, very peaceful. And he had to go and renew his visa. And you can imagine what happened. There was a kind of frustration, and he had a complete rage, and he realised that his practice had not advanced quite to the extent that he thought it had. So certainly solitary practice is really to be encouraged and valued. And when one is emerging from solitary practice, I find that the more peaceful I've been, the more careful I need to be when I come out of retreat. And I've just had a longish chunk of retreat in the Hermitage up in Scotland, and it was interesting to notice how irritable I was after it. It's almost as though you become super sensitive. at the end of a retreat it can be helpful just to take some time just to acknowledge, the situation and that you're going to be having to deal with, people, and you're going to have conversations with people and interact, and you're going to have to be more active in the world. And just to sort of take a little time to kind of prepare. Not that you shut down completely, but there's a kind of a wise protectiveness, so that you're not completely blown apart when you suddenly have to start interacting with people. But it's not that when you go out into the world your practice stops. And I get very concerned sometimes. I hear people say, well, I practiced here and I practiced there and I practiced, now I'm saving up money so I can practice some more. You save up money, you practice when you're saving up money. You practice when you're cleaning your teeth. You practice when you're having an argument with somebody. You practice when you're waiting for the bus. You practice when you're queuing up in the supermarket. You're practicing, practices all the time. And that's all right. So it's not that you make a big effort when you go on retreat to practice and then stop practicing, but it's like you make a medium effort all the time. There's a kind of, it becomes more balanced, I would say. And as far as my sense of humour, I think it's become a bit kinder. I hope it has.
To become a nun in a tradition which is not from your originating country, probably been a lot of obstacles and things. Do you recognize the moment or the period where this decision was building up, and how did that happen?
It was a big surprise, because when I first came across the teachings, I did think they were very good, and I was very inspired by the monks. I had been on retreat previously in a Christian monastery, or 2 Christian monasteries, and I realised I actually really loved monastic life. I loved the simplicity, I loved the rhythm, and I loved the commitment that it involved, but I never for a moment thought I would be a Christian nun. I also had a very strong desire to serve in some way, for my life to be useful. So that was kind of there as well. Talking a lot about my former boyfriend this evening, actually. It was interesting because before the first retreat that I did with Ajahn Sumedho, we'd had a time of being apart, and he'd had a lot of contact with the monks, and he said that he was thinking about becoming a novice monk. And I said, that's much too extreme. I said, you can practice just as well as a layperson. And then it was about 3 weeks later, during the retreat, that Ajahn Sumedho he talked quite a lot about monastic life, and he talked about the fact that they had a property down in West Sussex, and that the monks were going to be moving there and have a proper training monastery for monks, and maybe even facilities where women could train as nuns. And immediately, I thought, wow, that's what I want to do. So the actual decision happened quite, it was an immediate sense, because I could see that it was a coming together of things that I really valued, that I was looking for. But I kept it very quiet. It was a kind of a shock to me, and certainly would have been a shock to other people. So I didn't talk about it very much to start with. It was only actually when I actually eventually got permission to be a nun that I began to speak about it, say with my family and so on. It was much more just something that I was moving gradually towards. I remember after my first stay at Chithurst, Ajahn Sumedho asked, what I thought of the place, and I said, it's very, very nice, and I'd like to come back. And I said, for a while, because the idea of actually making that commitment was still a bit sort of shocking to me. But the decision, it was like sort of being pulled, just something in the heart that was happening. That in a way, people say, it must have been a very big decision. And for me, it would have been much more of a decision not to be a nun, because it was so strong. There were kind of 2 things happening. I still had my job. I was working in Edinburgh, and I'd be sort of driving around doing my job and sort of thinking, I'm going to be a Buddhist nun. But at this level, it was the most natural thing in the world. So it was kind of gradual, but also it was sudden. And for years I was amazed, I was kind of surprised. I thought, I'm a Buddhist nun. How did this happen? Kind of thing. And it still feels kind of peculiar. But I've never had any, I've never wanted to do anything else. I've never thought seriously about leaving. I've thought sometimes I can't stand it, but I've never, I've always had this sense of gratitude because I think because my suffering was so bad and I was so excited about the possibility of a cure. And I do love this life, even though it's very, very difficult sometimes. At the moment it's fine with me. I don't know what's going to happen in the future, but I'm still here.
What do you do during the day in a monastery?
Well, different things. I'll tell you about the monastic routine at our biggest monasteries, just to give you a sense. We have early morning meditation and chanting, so that's at 5 o'clock. So mostly people get up around 4 and wake up, do a bit of yoga or something to just get the body awake, and then 5 o'clock we gather. We sit quietly for an hour or so, and then we do chanting, and the chanting is either in Pali or English, or we have a chanting where we do one line Pali, one line English. Pali is the scriptural language, and the chanting at that time is mostly recollections of the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, and the essential teachings. Chanting to kind of inspire and encourage and remind us. After that, there's what we call chores, which is like the time that people have some kind of job in the monastery, cleaning something or sorting something or tidying something or arranging flowers or some kind of small job that they do for half an hour or so. Then there's breakfast, and mostly in the big monasteries we have a kind of porridge for breakfast and a hot drink of some kind. Sometimes there's a bit of fruit as well. Occasionally we have croissant. A bit exciting, interesting. So it's a fairly simple breakfast, just to give a bit of energy. Then in the morning there's a work period, and so either you help in the kitchen with preparing the main meal, or you're given some kind of job to do, just to help with looking after the place, or looking after the people, or the administration, something needs doing. Then we have our main meal of the day before noon. In the summertime it's before 1 o'clock, which is kind of like when the sun is in the middle of the sky. So we have quite a big meal then. And we generally have an alms bowl, and so we have the food, we eat out of the bowl. And the meal is generally quite formal. The food has to be received formally, and then we can help ourselves.
You're a vegetarian?
Not strictly, which is a surprise to people. I would encourage vegetarianism, and I prefer to be vegetarian, but it's not like, in fact, in the time of the Buddha, one of his cousin, who was a very strong rival, very jealous of the Buddha, tried to create a separate sect, tried to cause a division by suggesting that they be vegetarian, but the Buddha said no, because he wanted that we would receive food from anybody. So rather than having very particular ideas about what food we could receive, we make ourselves available to receive any food from anybody. The only exception is certain kinds of flesh, animal, and that it has to be cooked. And it can't have been an animal that was killed particularly to offer to us. So if somebody said, I'm going to kill a chicken so I can cook chicken for you to have, you have to say, well, actually I couldn't accept that. So we're not directly responsible for an animal being killed. But we can receive food that other people have prepared for themselves and choose to offer us. So we receive whatever is offered, but it's up to individual monks and nuns whether they keep a strict vegetarian diet or not.
So you sometimes prepare meat in the monastery?
I'm not sure what happens in the kitchen at Amaravati.
Never.
No.
Never. People do bring meat, but meat was never prepared.
So we have the meal. Then after the meal there's a chance to rest. The afternoon is generally kind of free time, so people are encouraged to use the time for meditation or study, or they could go for a walk, or if they have some work that needs finishing off, or maybe there are meetings. I've been just in lots and lots of meetings these last days. Lots of meetings. So sometimes we have meetings. We have generally a cup of tea or something at 5, around about 5 o'clock, and then we have our evening chanting at 7:30, evening chanting and meditation, and that goes on till about 8:30, 9, something like that, and then people can retire after that. So sometimes people, you can go to bed when you like. Sometimes you go to bed, quite early, 8:30, 9, 9:30. Some people like to stay up later to meditate longer into the night. So that's the kind of routine that we have.
And visitors do have some kind of public meditations or something?
We have, visitors can come and stay in the monastery and they join in with the monastic routine. At Amaravati they have meditation workshop every Saturday afternoon from 2 till 4. Different monks or nuns will lead a period of meditation. And then we have a retreat centre there. And there are weekend retreats, 10-day retreats that people can, and residential retreats that people can go to. And they're taught by different monks or nuns. And during those times you keep noble silence, you follow a much more of like a monastic routine. And there's quite a lot of teaching given. So it's a very good opportunity actually, because you have a chance to hear the teachings and actually put them into practice. So as well as hearing about suffering, you have a chance to experience. And also to experience the ending of suffering, because that's the third noble truth. So suffering, there's an origin of suffering, ending of suffering, and the path that can be developed leading to the ending of suffering. So you have a chance to develop the path when you come on retreat. So there are quite a lot of opportunities for lay people at Amaravati. We also have, during the summertime, there are public talks, which are kind of more general for members of the public to come to and hear some teaching. There are opportunities there.
Do you travel a lot?
Do I travel a lot? Well, I'm trying to travel less and less. I'm getting old now, so I'd like to stop travelling so much. At the moment, the last year or two, I've really tried to stay more. In 2011, there was a property purchased for the nuns in Scotland, and it's a hermitage, and I'm based there. So I try to be there as much as possible, and I also need to visit our other monasteries, the other bits of our monastic community for meetings and sometimes just to offer support of one kind or another. So I'm doing less travelling abroad, less teaching abroad. I could do a lot, but as I said, I prefer to try and focus on taking care of the community and just looking after myself. Yeah, but I became very sick some years ago, and during that time my priorities shifted from putting everybody else first to putting this one first. So now it's me, then the ordained community of sisters particularly, and then travelling and teaching elsewhere. So I still do a little bit, but not so much. It's not that I don't want to, but there's only one, I only have this opportunity, I only have one body, so I try and use it in the way that's going to bring most benefit to most people.
I was wondering if you could say more about unsatisfactory.
Unsatisfactory?
Yes.
Yeah, this word dukkha, which is translated as unsatisfactoriness. I've got the cramp. What is the unsatisfactoriness of... These bodies are very unsatisfactory. Yes, it's something that the Buddha pointed to as what he called the first noble truth. There is dukkha. And that this dukkha needs to be understood. Generally, when we think of suffering or unsatisfactoriness, we want to get rid of it. That's the automatic reaction. If I have cramp, I want to get rid of it as quickly as possible. I don't want to be patient with it. If I'm feeling unhappy, I want to be happy as quickly as possible. But basically, even if I get happy, how long can I stay happy? So there's a feeling of actually wanting to hold on to the happiness and knowing that the happiness is not going to last. So you begin to see that even happiness is unsatisfactory. It's not a kind of, it doesn't bring a lasting solution to life's problems. There's the unsatisfactoriness of pain, either painful physical conditions or painful mental conditions or being in unpleasant situations of one kind or another. That's obviously unsatisfactory. Then there's the unsatisfactoriness of the fact that things are changing. So you can't, even if you get everything just the way you want it, sooner or later you're going to want to get more of it, or you want to get something different, you get bored with it. It doesn't last. The reason why it's really important to understand this is to understand the way to resolve it. The automatic reaction is to try to get rid of it, the unhappiness, or to try and find a happiness that's going to last forever. And then eventually, with a bit of luck, you give up on that. You realise it's hopeless. This is a very, very good state to get to, the hopelessness of it all, because then you begin to think, well, what is there that I can rely on? You know, is there a possibility of finding peace and well-being in this world, as a human being? And this is kind of like the good news. This is what the Buddha was pointing to, that yes, there is a way to end suffering. There is a way out of suffering. This is where we talk about the letting go practice, the establishing ourselves in the present moment. As I said before, to realise that the real suffering is wanting things to be other than the way that they are, wanting to get rid of the pain, wanting the happiness to last forever. When we let go of that and simply are fully present, then there actually isn't any suffering. There might be discomfort, we might be in an unfortunate mood, we might, be really enjoying a situation that we would quite like to have it last forever, but when we recognise it's not going to last forever, and we're just present with it, then there's a sense of peacefulness. There's no suffering. So the enlightened, an enlightened human being is one who is able to maintain that sense of presence. The other kind of suffering is a sense of selfhood, the wanting to be something. So that's the other thing that we're encouraged to investigate. Is there anybody here, basically? Or who am I? What am I? What is this? And to begin to see that this is just a collection of continuously changing things. So we don't have to hold on to any idea of who and what we are. We don't have to maintain a sense of who and what we are. Sometimes think that, well, maybe I'll disappear if I give up the sense of being somebody. But the Buddha didn't disappear. He definitely didn't have an ego. He wasn't identified with being somebody, but he was, he had a personality, he had a sense of humour, he had wisdom, he had compassion. He lived and served humanity for 45 years after his enlightenment. Freedom is not about getting rid of, but it's about actually being fully present and living fully and completely. You begin to see how the ego, the sense of self that we all cling to so desperately, is actually that we're better off without it. But it's going to keep arising until we've actually fully understood and let go. And every time it arises, rather than thinking, oh, there it goes again, how terrible, I thought I was enlightened, but I'm not. Oh dear, hopeless case. We just think, okay, come on, Candasiri, what's that about? What's going on here? Where's the attachment? Where's the clinging? What are you frightened of? Just asking questions just to really begin to see where the clinging is, where the letting go needs to happen. Then there's the letting go, and then, okay, we re-establish ourselves in presence and a sense of peacefulness. So dukkha is the number one thing to take an interest in. People think dukkha is bad news, but dukkha is what keeps us practicing. Keeps us curious. I've said a lot to digest. I wish all of you well-being, ease, joy, and hopefully liberation. Maybe we just sit quietly for a few minutes and we can close the evening. So, closing the eyes or lowering the gaze. And then just taking a few minutes just to notice how things are now. The ideas, the sense, how it is for you right now. Establishing ourselves in a sense of well-being and a sense of kindliness. With the intention, may this being be well.